Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I want to start my talk with a quotation. And the quotation goes like this: "When goods do not cross borders, then soldiers will." This is a quotation that is attributed to a French economist in the 19th century, a guy called Frédéric Bastiat. Now, he was not the first one to establish the link between trade and armed conflict. In fact, this link had been established much before. There's this Greek-Roman writer called Plutarch. I guess some of you have heard about Plutarch. And Plutarch had this theory that trade, and he was thinking about trade between different nations, that trade corrects the defects of people understanding each other. So he was thinking about trade between Phoenicians and Greeks. He was thinking about trade between Romans and Egyptians. And he said, these people don't quite understand each other. And the best way for them to understand each other is for them to trade with each other. Reminds me of a friend that I have in China. And he told me that after living many years in China, he had some Chinese people that he knew. He was in a treadmill in the gym, and his Chinese friend said, "We are not going to be real friends until we do business together." Doing business together is what really makes you understand people. Let's do a fast forward. In the 18th century, Montesquieu, the French philosopher, established this concept of doux commerce in French, so sweet commerce. Commerce as something that is a nice human activity. Now, I'm not here really to talk about Greek, Roman, French philosophers and writers. I'm here to talk about, okay, stay with me because it might be a little bit boring, import tariffs. Don't look at your phone just now, please. Import tariffs are actually duties that the government asks people to pay for importing goods. So you think about a container ship in a port, goes to customs, and in order for that product to enter the country, somebody needs to pay a tax. Mind you, we all are maybe subject to that. When we arrive at an airport and you choose to go the green light, nothing to declare, or the red one, where you have things to declare. And if you have things to declare, you probably need to pay something because you were importing something that should be paying a tariff. Now, as many of you, I was not too keen on import tariffs when I started my professional career. I studied law and diplomatics, and I was really keen to work on the issues of of politics and peace. I wanted to be posted to New York, to the United Nations. I studied hard. I got a great grade at the end of Diplomatic Academy, and I was absolutely sure I was going to work on war and peace. Well, guess what? They gave me a posting on trade. I cannot tell you how frustrated and disappointed I was. And I got home and I told my wife, I can't believe this. I wanted to do something and, now they force me to work with this boring stuff. And my wife said, you know what? They've given you lemons, make a lemonade. So I started working and studying trade and trade tariffs. And what I found was that it was something that actually had quite a bit of interest in history, and especially in the history of the 20th century. And I started reading about tariffs that were applied in the 1930s. The 1930s is a tricky period in history. It follows World War I. More than 20 million people died in World War I. Germany had to pay war reparations. There was a crash in the New York Stock Exchange in 1929. This is the time of the Great Depression in the United States. If you read John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, the story of this family, poor, dirt poor, suffering from poverty because of the Great Depression. Two American senators, Senator Smoot and Senator Hawley, in 1930, decided that the United States was importing too much products. They wanted to protect American jobs, as they said. We need to protect American jobs, and to do so, we're going to raise tariffs. On what product? Steel. Why steel? What do you make with steel? Well, steel allows you to build buildings super fast, high-rise buildings. Steel is the product for building cars. Steel is the product for building airplanes. Steel is the product for building tanks. And as Germany was coming out of the Depression in the early 1930s, the United States imposes high import tariffs on steel coming from Germany. What happens? Well, trade between Germany and the United States falls by tenfold. And Germany lives through quite a bit of social upheaval, which makes it easier for a certain nationalistic, populist party to come to power in Germany in the 1930s. You know the rest of the story, right? And it's not a pretty one. So much so that at the end of the war, people had this absolute conviction that the raising of import tariffs on steel by the United States in 1930 was one of the causes of World War II. And they said, we need to find a way so that import tariffs are not raised. We need to find a way to prohibit countries from raising import tariffs. How are we going to do this? Well, let's have an international treaty. So they negotiated a treaty that said, okay, countries will not be able to raise import tariffs after they negotiate with each other, and they will only be able to do so in certain specific conditions. So let's have an agreement amongst ourselves that we negotiate a certain level of import tariffs, and we promise each other we will not raise them to avoid that problem that had existed back in the 30s. And then they said, you know what? In addition to this, we might agree on something else. Let's agree that we will treat each other equally, so that if I am trading with country A under certain conditions, the same conditions will apply to country B or country C. So, non-discrimination amongst your partners. You treat all of your trading partners equally, so that the tariff that you apply to product coming from country A is the same as the tariff that is applied to the product coming from country B. And that you benefit from this as well. And they said, well, I guess we need something else. We need to find a way not to discriminate between imported and domestic products. So once the product has left customs and paid the import tariff, you cannot say the imported product is sold only in, say, the periphery of a city, and in downtown, that city, in the nice shopping mall, you can only sell domestic goods. It's funny, these rules apply today, and I guess the majority of you are not aware of this, right? When you go to the supermarket today, or when you go and buy your mobile phone, you don't really ask, is this a Swiss one or is it an American one? Well, mobile phones actually don't have a made in, right? These days. They are made in many different places. But even coffee, you go to the supermarket, do you always ask, unless you're going for boutique coffee, do you ask whether your coffee is coming from Colombia or from Costa Rica or from Brazil? Not really. You buy any blend of coffee. All of this exists because of these rules. And these rules have become incredibly important throughout the years, at least since 1948. And these rules, please, again, stay with me, don't fall asleep. These rules are in an agreement called the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, the GATT. I must say, I think I fell in love with the GATT. Strange as it may seem. So much so that I started working with these issues, and then I was posted to Geneva in the early 1990s, and I saw a fantastic negotiation that was the result, now with hindsight, of the end of the Cold War. The GATT was basically an agreement amongst Western countries, amongst capitalist countries, because the Soviet Union was not a member of the GATT, and neither was China. So it was basically an agreement between the Western countries plus Japan plus developing countries. Now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was a new time, new geopolitics, right? This is the time when a professor at Harvard called Francis Fukuyama wrote an article called The End of History. The end of history means now everybody is going to be a liberal democracy. The Western values are going to prevail. End of story. Well, that was the moment when this negotiation took place in Geneva, and I was happy enough to be there and see the creation of this organization. Still exists. That's where I work, the World Trade Organization. Now, the World Trade Organization is not an organization, as many people think, that is about free trade. Not really. When kids come to Geneva to visit us, and they want to know what the WTO is about, we compare trade in the world with the traffic of cars in a city. So, as if each country was a vehicle. We are not a vehicle in the WTO, but we are the ones who set the traffic rules. Because if you don't have traffic rules, then you might have an accident or you might have a traffic jam. But if everybody plays by the same rules, then things will be flowing, right? And again, nobody thinks about this. But in a way, that we all benefit from this. Business benefits from this, consumers benefit from this. And one important thing, already in the times of the GATT, you could have exceptions for protection of the environment. So countries can actually raise tariffs if that is to protect the environment. There is a rule for protection of health. So no country is obliged to import goods from a region where there's an outbreak of swine fever, for example. All of this is completely legitimate. So there are lots of exceptions, and a lot of exceptions today are in the realm of health, in the realm of environment, and of course, there are other types of exceptions. For example, for trade with zones of conflict, so that where there is a place with conflict, you can bring food to people easily, right? So all of this is foreseen in these agreements. The fact of the matter, though, is that these agreements, which are almost like abstract ideas, right? All of these things exist because some people thought about them. They are ideas or ideals with an L. Ideals of people understanding each other and trading according to rules and doing this so that there's predictability, so that there's no ups and downs in economics. We are living different times today. Tariffs are being applied, again, on steel. And this is why I say I may be one of the few people on earth that gets emotional when I fly over the port of Singapore and I see just this gigantic surface of containers. You know, the airplane lands in Singapore and it's containers, containers, containers. Whereas many people see that as an excess of trade, I see that as human understanding and a factor for peace. Thank you.